The Blackwood Brothers, Part 1, The Disease That Didn't Kill Them. Studio microphone opening hook, spoken slowly, like a campfire tale. They say the summer of 1878 was the hottest Harper County ever saw. Crops curled up in the sun, dogs refused to bark, and even the cicadas sounded tired. But it wasn't the heat that folks remember, it was the sickness. 47 people died that summer from typhoid fever. But four brothers didn't. Not only did they survive, they didn't even get sick. Not a fever, not a cough. Not a single drop of sweat out of place. And that's where the real horror begins. Because what the sickness didn't take, something else did. The doctors who examined the brothers afterward refused to write a single word down. The Kansas State Medical Board sealed the files. And the local Methodist Church. They burned every mention of the Blackwood family from their records, pages ripped out, names scorched to ash. So why was their survival treated like a curse? Because the Blackwood brothers didn't walk away unchanged. By the time winter came, they no longer cast proper shadows. Their voices made people's ears bleed. And their eyes reflected moonlight like the eyes of wolves. Now, after almost 150 years of silence, we're going to open the door they tried to keep shut. But before we do, I have one question for you. Are you brave enough to listen to what really happened on that Kansas farm? If you're, subscribe, drop a comment with your city or state, and let the others know you're one of us. Because this isn't just a story. This is a warning. Let's go back to Cedar Ridge, Kansas, 1878. Studio microphone main story begins. Cedar Ridge wasn't much more than a whisper on the prairie. A small farming community tucked between golden wheat fields and slow-moving cattle. Maybe 300 folks, if you counted babies and drifters. But they were proud people, tough, faithful, and suspicious of outsiders. And when the Blackwood brothers arrived in the spring of 1872, they were definitely outsiders. Four of them, Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel Blackwood. All unmarried, all deeply religious, all determined to start fresh. They came from Clinton County, Ohio, hauling everything they owned in two covered wagons. They bought 640 acres of untouched prairie land and got to work building a life. But they weren't like the other farmers. Ezra, the eldest, was 36 when they arrived. A quiet, strong man who spoke only when he had something worth saying. His pale blue eyes could stop a conversation cold, like he was always seeing something you couldn't. Caleb, 34, was the brains. He could calculate bushel prices in his head and forecast the weather better than the town's almanac. His ledgers were so perfect they looked printed. Josiah, 31, was the scholar. He'd been studying theology and medicine at Ohio Wesleyan before their father died. His room looked more like a professor's study than a farmer's quarters, books, notes, diagrams, and things no one else understood. Then there was Abel, 25, the zealot, the one who'd fast for days, speak in tongues, and sometimes collapse from praying too hard. Folks back in Ohio said he was touched by the Spirit. Others said something darker had touched him too. The brothers lived apart from town life. They built their own chapel on a rise above their land, hand-quarried limestone, oak timber, walnut pews. It glowed in the sunrise and sunset, a beacon to no one but themselves. Every morning at 4 a.m., they prayed together in silence. Every night after the work was done, they returned to that chapel, sometimes staying until well past midnight, whispering scriptures, interpreting dreams, waiting for the Spirit to speak. And yet, despite their strangeness, the people of Cedar Ridge respected the Blackwoods. They worked hard, never cheated anyone, and helped their neighbors when needed. But no one could quite figure them out. They never joked, never joined dances, never let their guard down. Even their shadows seemed off, like they bent the wrong way in sunlight. Studio microphone build up to the outbreak. That summer, the summer everything broke, started out normal enough. The wheat was tall, the cattle were fat, and the air smelled like dry grass and fresh promise. Until July 15th, Sarah Hardman, who ran the general store with her husband Ben, woke up that morning smiling and strong. By midday, she was burning with fever, her skin mottled with strange rose-colored patches. Dr. Samuel Morrison rode in from the Henderson farm, where he'd spent the morning delivering a difficult breech birth. When he saw Sarah, his face changed. Typhoid, he whispered. Within days, the disease spread like prairie fire. Households were quarantined, wells were boiled, people stopped shaking hands, and the church bell that usually rang for weddings and Sunday service, now tolled only for funerals. Studio microphone. But the Blackwoods. Every home in Cedar Ridge feared the worst. Every home except one. The Blackwood farm stayed untouched. No fever. No weakness. Not even a cough. Neighbors whispered that maybe God had spared them for their righteousness. But behind the doors of that two-story farmhouse, something was changing. They stopped coming to town. Their wheat ripened early, too early. Their cattle started bellowing at night for no reason, eyes wide with panic. And those who passed by claimed they saw movement in the chapel windows after midnight, shapes that didn't match the brothers' silhouettes. One ranch hand who worked briefly for them later claimed he found strange symbols burned into the barn's rafters, and that he heard voices coming from the cornfield when no one was there. Studio microphone. Closing narration for Part 1. By the time frost touched the prairie in early October, the town had lost 47 souls. Cedar Ridge would never be the same. And neither would the Blackwood brothers. Because they had survived what no one else could. But they had brought something back with them. Something that science couldn't explain. Something that faith dared not name. And in Part 2, we'll dig deeper into the first signs of what the brothers were becoming, and the night a local pastor came to confront them alone. He never made it back down the hill. So tell me, friends, do you still believe in miracles? Or do you believe in something else? Stay subscribed, and I'll see you in the shades. The Blackwood Brothers, Part 2, The Miracle and the Price. Studio microphone. Intro. Spoken softly, dramatically. When you hear about miracles, you imagine joy, healing, hope. But nobody talks about the cost. In Cedar Ridge, Kansas, the summer of 1878 was already cursed by a strange typhoid fever that didn't play by the rules of medicine. People weren't getting sick over days, they were collapsing within hours. Laughing at breakfast, dead by midnight. But something was changing, not just in the town, but in the Blackwood brothers. And when one of them finally came down from their isolated hilltop farm, he didn't bring a cure. He brought something much more dangerous. Let's go back to where we left off. Studio microphone. Story begins. Dr. Samuel Morrison had been a physician for over 20 years. He'd studied in Philadelphia, treated epidemics, and delivered hundreds of babies. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what he saw on the afternoon of July 15, 1878, inside the Hartman General Store. Sarah Hartman, a healthy woman in her 40s, had woken up cheerful and alert. By noon, she was burning up with a fever so high, Morrison's thermometer could barely measure it. Her husband Benjamin, normally calm, paced the floor like a man already mourning. "She was fine this morning, Doc," he kept saying. "Laughin', cookin', chattin' with the Henderson boys. How does this happen in just a few hours?" Dr. Morrison had seen typhoid before, but never like this. Symptoms that normally took days to unfold were now erupting in a matter of hours. Sarah's skin was covered in symmetrical, deep red patches that almost looked intentional. He tried everything: cold compresses, laudanum, constant monitoring, but by midnight, Sarah Hartman was dead. And even in death, something wasn't right. Her skin stiffened unnaturally fast. Her body didn't decay the way it should have. And her eyes, God help him, kept opening on their own, even after he'd shut them over and over again. Studio microphone. The outbreak spreads. Within 24 hours, 3 more people had collapsed with the same symptoms. The common link: water from the town's central well. Dr. Morrison examined the well and found signs of runoff contamination. That should have explained everything. But it didn't, because what came next defied all logic. Old Heinrich Zimmermann, a tough German farmer, went from plowing his fields to convulsing on his kitchen floor in less than 12 hours. As he lay dying, he began speaking in languages no one recognized, not German, not English. The words were old, heavy, and terrifying. Then came the Patterson twins, Emma and Ellen. 16 years old, bright, beloved, they both collapsed the same day. Morrison was called too late. Their father would later tell him, with shaking hands, that the girls had sat up just before death, and started reciting prayers in perfect unison, in a tongue that sounded like Latin, but twisted, guttural, wrong. By August 1st, 14 people were dead. All within 24 hours of the first symptom. Their fevers were off the charts. Their final moments were violent, frenzied. And Morrison's medical notes started to sound more like a priest's journal than a doctor's log. Something dark was moving through Cedar Ridge. And that's when the Blackwood brothers stepped into the story. Studio microphone. The revelation. While the rest of the town isolated themselves, the Blackwoods had stayed quiet, distant, just as they always did. But on August 10th, during evening prayer, Josiah Blackwood rose from the chapel floor with tears in his eyes and made a declaration to his brothers. "Greater than, the Lord has spoken," he said. "This plague is not a punishment, it's a test. And we've been chosen, not to survive it, but to carry it." He told them it was their divine duty to step into the fire. Not to run from the sickness, but to take it into themselves. Ezra hesitated. Abel wept and praised God. Caleb simply nodded, already calculating what would need to be done. And the next morning, Josiah walked into town. Studio microphone, the miracle. Josiah's first stop was the home of Thomas Fletcher, the town blacksmith. His 8-year-old son, Timothy, had fallen ill overnight. Convulsions, sores, fever like fire. The boy's parents had been praying for hours when Josiah arrived. He entered quietly, knelt beside the child's bed, and placed his hands on Timothy's forehead. But what he said next, no one would forget. "Greater than, Lord," Josiah prayed, "if this child must suffer, then let that suffering pass into me. Let us, my brothers and I, carry what this boy cannot. Use us, change us, but spare him." Witnesses later claimed the room changed temperature. That a strange stillness fell over everything. That the air vibrated. And then, Timothy opened his eyes. Calm, clear, hungry. The fever was gone. It was a miracle. But something else happened too. Josiah stood up, trembling. His skin flushed. His pale blue eyes now shimmered with flecks of gold. And when he spoke again, his voice echoed unnaturally in the quiet room. The sickness had passed into him. Studio microphone, the chain reaction. For the next 2 days, Josiah went door to door, visiting every home touched by the sickness. He repeated the ritual over and over, laying hands, praying the same strange prayer, asking the Lord to place the burden on him and his brothers. And the results were always the same. The sick were healed. Josiah got sicker. By August 13th, he returned to the Blackwood farm burning with fever, yet fully alert, speaking calmly. "This is not death," he told his stunned brothers. "This is refinement. We are being remade." And then, the others began to change. Ezra, Caleb, Abel, each began showing signs, just like Josiah. But the symptoms weren't normal. They were impossible. Studio microphone, the doctor's visit. On August 18th, Drive. Morrison rode to the Blackwood farm for what would become the most disturbing medical visit of his career. As he arrived, the fields were lush and green, too green. The wheat swayed unnaturally, as if touched by a breeze that wasn't blowing anywhere else. The cattle stood silently in the shade, perfectly still, watching. When Ezra opened the door, Morrison's heart dropped. Ezra's skin was translucent. He could see the glowing network of gold veins beneath. And when Ezra spoke, his voice carried overtones, harmonic echoes, that vibrated in Morrison's chest. "Greater than, we've been expecting you, Doctor," Ezra said. "You are here to witness. To understand." Morrison stepped inside and found all 4 brothers seated in a perfect square formation, their bodies aligned like symbols carved into space itself. They were alive, breathing, speaking, but they were no longer normal. Studio microphone, what they had become. Ezra's body radiated heat. His temperature read 107 degrees, yet he spoke with total clarity. Caleb's skin was covered in red markings, but they weren't random. They formed moving mathematical equations, shifting slowly like living parchment. "Greater than, we are becoming the proof," Caleb whispered. "The bridge between matter and eternity." Josiah's skin looked like old scroll paper, etched with Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and symbols Morrison couldn't identify. When he spoke, the sound came from every direction at once. "Greater than, we have learned what science cannot hold," Josiah said. "And we are writing it down. And Abel, dear God." Abel glowed. A soft, cold, blue-white light poured from him. His eyes were solid orbs of starlight. "Greater than, we don't need food anymore," he said. "We draw energy from sources you can't yet understand." Studio microphone, closing narration for part 2. Dr. Morrison left the Blackwood farm shaken to his core. His medical notes stopped calling it typhoid. He didn't know what to call it. He suspected contamination, maybe a rare toxin in their grain. But he also wrote something else that night, in the margins of his journal. "Greater than, if this is a disease, it is unlike anything nature has ever created. And if it's not, then God help us all. In part 3, we'll return to Cedar Ridge, where fear is growing, and where the next visitor to the Blackwood farm wouldn't be a doctor. It would be a pastor. And he'd bring holy water, a crucifix, and a warning. The Blackwood Brothers, Part 3, The Pastor's Warning. Studio microphone opening hook, slow, suspenseful voice. The human body can endure a fever of 104 degrees for a short time, but Ezra Blackwood sat upright, glowing from beneath his skin, speaking in perfect harmony at 107. The laws of medicine had failed. The rules of nature had bent. And in the quiet Kansas town of Cedar Ridge, the whispers began, "They're not human anymore." But what happens when the people you once trusted with your soul start changing into something you no longer recognize? Tonight, we follow the only man who dared challenge the brothers face to face, not with medicine but with scripture. And the day he walked up the hill to the Blackwood farm would be the last day anyone saw him alive. Let's go back to August of 1878. Studio microphone main story begins. Fear was thick in the air. By mid-August, the typhoid outbreak had claimed 27 lives, but Drive Morrison no longer believed it was typhoid at all. People were dying too fast. Others were being cured by the mere touch of a Blackwood. And then, something even stranger started happening. The cured began to change. Timothy Fletcher, the 8-year-old boy Josiah had saved, was now perfectly healthy, but he stopped speaking. Just stared into the distance with eyes that shimmered faint gold. The Patterson twins' younger brother, Thomas Jr., swore his sisters had returned. He claimed he saw them in the wheat fields late at night, walking in step, mouths moving in silence. And those who had contact with the Blackwoods reported disturbing dreams, visions of symbols, floating geometry, foreign languages, and vast black skies filled with radiant shapes that pulsed like stars. Dr. Morrison tried to warn the town. But no one listened. Instead, they turned to Reverend Eli Barrett, the newly appointed pastor of the Cedar Ridge Methodist Church. A man who believed that not everything holy comes from heaven. Studio microphone enter Reverend Barrett. Reverend Barrett was only 39, but years of missionary work had weathered him. He wasn't just a preacher, he was a fighter. A man who'd served in the Civil War, then walked across disease-ridden towns in Louisiana and Arkansas during outbreaks, helping both the sick and the dying. He didn't scare easy, but even he admitted, something about the Blackwoods chilled him to the marrow. After hearing Morrison's account of their transformation, Reverend Barrett requested a private meeting with the doctor. What began as a polite theological discussion soon turned into a whispered strategy session. They believe they're chosen, Morrison said. They talk about becoming vessels. They don't sleep. They don't eat. Reverend Barrett nodded solemnly. Then we need to see what spirit has chosen them. Studio microphone August 19th, The Visit. Reverend Barrett rode alone that evening, just before sunset. In his satchel, a worn leather Bible, a silver crucifix, and a small vial of holy water blessed by Bishop Talbot himself. As he approached the Blackwood farm, he immediately noticed the same unnatural beauty Morrison had described: cattle that stood too still, fields that shimmered as if lit from beneath, and wheat that bent toward the house as if drawn by gravity. The chapel on the hill glowed faintly, as if lit by a candle that cast no shadow. When he reached the front steps of the farmhouse, Ezra was already waiting. "Greater than, you've come to see," Ezra said quietly. Barrett felt his skin crawl. Ezra's voice was richer than any man's had a right to be, echoing not in his ears, but in his chest. "Greater than, I've come to pray," Barrett replied. "And to listen. If there's truth in you, let me hear it. If there's darkness, God will show me." Ezra nodded. "Then enter. You're welcome in our house." Studio microphone inside the farmhouse. The brothers were seated again, just like before. But this time, something had changed. The room was humming. A low, vibrating tone filled the space, barely audible, but impossible to ignore. It made the air feel thick, like syrup. Candles flickered with flames that moved against the draft. Abel's glow was brighter now, enough to cast shadows. Josiah was writing symbols on the walls with chalk that didn't break. Caleb stared at the floor, eyes closed, lips whispering equations under his breath. Reverend Barrett stepped forward and pulled out his Bible. "Greater than, I've seen miracles," he said firmly. "But what's happening here isn't from the Gospels. It's from something else." Ezra stood silently. "Greater than, you believe we're cursed," he said. "Greater than, I believe you're deceived," Barrett snapped. The preacher stepped toward Abel, and that's when the glow intensified. The entire room was filled with a soft white light, warm and terrifying. Barrett splashed the holy water. The glow flickered, but it didn't vanish. Instead, Abel smiled. Greater than, you think this is possession, he said. But we invited this. Greater than, what is it? Barrett demanded. Josiah looked up from his wall of symbols. Greater than, we don't know its name. But it answers. It speaks. It teaches. Studio microphone, the confrontation. Barrett raised his crucifix and began praying loudly, calling on the name of Christ, rebuking spirits, commanding darkness to leave. And something did. The humming stopped. The brothers fell silent. Then, Caleb screamed, a high-pitched, unnatural sound that shattered one of the oil lamps in the corner of the room. His body contorted, veins glowing red, eyes rolling back. Ezra rushed to him, held him, whispered something that sounded like a language not made for human mouths. Barrett dropped to his knees, weeping, not in fear, but in sorrow. Greater than, you've made a deal, he said. You offered yourselves, not to God, but to something else. Ezra looked at him, gold flickering in his pupils. Greater than, we didn't make a deal, he said softly. We were chosen. Studio microphone, Barrett's last journal entry. That night, Reverend Barrett returned to his church in silence. He told no one what he'd seen. But in his private journal, found years later in a hidden drawer behind the altar, he had written just one final passage. Greater than August 19, 1878. I looked into their eyes and saw the cosmos staring back. I do not believe they're evil. But they are no longer ours. If they are God's, he has changed his face. And if they're not, he is no longer alone. Studio microphone, closing narration, build to next episode. The people of Cedar Ridge would never see Reverend Barrett again. He vanished the next day, his horse found grazing near the wheat fields, saddle torn and reins snapped. Some say he fled in fear. Others aren't so sure. Because late that night, someone heard music coming from the Blackwood chapel. And swore they saw a fifth voice join the brothers in prayer. In part 4, the town begins to unravel. Strange lights appear in the sky. The dead refuse to stay buried. And a secret hidden beneath the Blackwood farm begins to wake. Subscribe, comment your city, and if you still believe in miracles, ask yourself. Do you know who's answering your prayers? The Blackwood Brothers, Part 4, The Ground Beneath Us. Studio microphone, opening hook, quiet, eerie voice. There's something unsettling about the earth. You trust it. You build on it. You bury your dead in it. But what if it starts giving something back? What if one morning, you walk past a grave and realize the dirt's been pushed up from the inside? This is the story of what began rising from the prairie soil in Cedar Ridge, weeks after the Blackwood brothers changed. And why some people believe that what lives beneath their farm was never meant to be unearthed. Let's go back to the end of August 1878, where shadows no longer followed the sun. Studio microphone, main story begins. By the last week of August, Cedar Ridge was unraveling. The typhoid outbreak had stopped. No new cases. No more fever. No more deaths. But peace hadn't returned. Something worse had taken its place. People spoke in hushed voices now. Windows stayed shut. Doors were locked before sunset. And no one dared go near the Blackwood property, not after Reverend Barrett disappeared. Dr. Morrison tried to keep working, but even he confessed he couldn't explain what he was seeing. He kept waking at 3:33 a.m. every night, gasping for air, hands shaking. And outside his window, a single crow waited on the fence post each morning. Staring. Studio microphone, unearthly events begin. It started small. A local farmer, Elijah Barnes, came into town with his plow horses in a panic. He claimed the soil on the east side of his field had turned to ash overnight. Not just dry, ash. Soft, gray, powdery, and still warm to the touch. That same day, Benjamin Hartman, the general store owner, found a sealed crate behind his store. He hadn't ordered it. No one had delivered it. But when he pried it open, inside were 7 dead rabbits, perfectly preserved in wax, and each with a single eye painted on its forehead. Word spread quickly, and fear took root. That's when the ground began to change. Studio microphone, graves disturbed. At the far edge of town sat Red Hollow Cemetery, a quiet resting place surrounded by cottonwoods and silence. But on the morning of September 1st, gravedigger Thomas Jebson found something deeply wrong. 7 graves, freshly filled over the past month, had been disturbed. Not dug up, not vandalized, disturbed. The dirt had risen, mounted unnaturally high. No animal tracks, no signs of shovels. But when Jebsen touched the soil, it collapsed, revealing empty coffins. One after another, all 7 caskets were broken open from the inside. The wood split, clawed. Finger marks on the lids. And the bodies, gone. The names on the headstones read: Sarah Hardman, Emma Patterson, Ellen Patterson, Heinrich Zimmerman, Agnes Cook, Jacob Klein, and Reverend Eli Barrett, Studio microphone. What the town saw. That evening, the townspeople gathered at the church, those brave enough to leave their homes. Dr. Morrison brought his medical journal. Thomas Jebsen brought photographs of the open graves. Sheriff Redmond arrived with his shotgun, and trembling hands. But no one had answers. Until lights appeared in the sky. Just after midnight, a blue-white glow danced over the prairie, hanging motionless above the Blackwood farm. Not like lightning, not fire. It pulsed, it hovered, it moved against the wind. Some described it as an eye. Others swore they saw shapes shifting inside it, geometric, unnatural. The next morning, 3 families packed their wagons and fled Cedar Ridge. They never looked back. And on the edge of town, old Mary Lou Chambers, who hadn't left her house in 6 years, stood barefoot on her porch, whispering to the sky. "They're opening the ground," she said. Studio microphone back at the Blackwood farm. Inside the Blackwood home, transformation was complete. Their voices no longer came one at a time, but together. 4 voices, speaking in layered harmony, rising and falling like a choir. Even when only one mouth moved. Josiah now wrote symbols not only on walls, but on his own skin. His arms and chest were covered in inked circles, triangles, spirals, and unfamiliar runes. Caleb could recite entire books backward, forward, and in mirror language, all while his eyes remained closed. Abel had stopped speaking aloud. Instead, he hummed, a sound that vibrated objects in the room, made glass tremble, and once cracked a mirror in the hallway. And Ezra had begun to dig. Studio microphone. The dig site. Behind the chapel, a large stone circle appeared. 12 feet across, perfectly aligned with the rising sun. Ezra said the earth instructed him. He began removing soil from the center, digging with bare hands at first, then with shovels, then pickaxes. The other brothers joined him. What they unearthed was not bones, nor treasure. It was stone, not Kansas limestone, but something darker. Black, smooth, too smooth. They uncovered what looked like the top of a massive dome, just beneath the surface. It was covered in carvings, matching the symbols on Josiah's arms. They dug for 3 days. Then they stopped. Ezra stood at the edge of the pit, arms outstretched, and spoke a single sentence. Greater than, the mouth is opening. Studio microphone. The disappearance of Dr. Morrison. On September 4th, Drive. Morrison decided to confront them one last time. He saddled his horse, packed his medical kit, and rode out before dawn. He never returned. But 3 days later, a small envelope appeared on the steps of the Methodist church. Inside, a torn page from his medical journal, stained and written in haste. Greater than, their bodies are not dying. They are becoming. I saw what lay beneath the stone, it's breathing. I don't know how, I don't know what it means. But it's older than this land. Older than time. And I think, they're waiting for something. Studio microphone. Closing narration, leading to part 5. 7 graves stand empty. The dead refuse to rest. And beneath the Blackwood farm, something vast and ancient is beginning to stir. The townspeople will soon realize, this isn't a haunting. It's a summoning. In part 5, the truth begins to surface. A forgotten map, a missing Bible chapter, and the journal of a dying reverend that may reveal what's buried beneath the Kansas soil. Subscribe, comment your city below, and remember, some things should stay buried. Because not all graves were meant to be dug up. The Blackwood Brothers, Part 5, the 13th chapter. Studio microphone. Opening hook, slow, haunting voice. There are parts of the Bible most churches never read aloud. Verses too strange, too terrifying, or too ancient to trust. But when a forgotten scripture turns up in a dead pastor's journal, and a hand-drawn map points directly to the Blackwood farm, you start to realize, this wasn't a sickness. This was a summoning foretold long ago. Tonight, we open a chapter that was meant to stay hidden. And with it, comes the secret of what lies beneath Cedar Ridge. Studio microphone. Main story begins. 3 weeks had passed since Drive. Morrison disappeared. And still, no one dared approach the Blackwood farm, not even the sheriff. But the town's fear only deepened when the Methodist church bell rang at 3:33 a.m. No one was inside. The doors were locked, but sitting on the altar was a leather-bound journal. Its cover was burned, its pages smelled of ash and oil. And embossed into the first page were the initials, E.B. Eli Barrett, --. Studio microphone, The Lost Journal. Inside the journal, the final entries of Reverend Barrett were recorded in shaky, rushed handwriting. The first page was clear. Greater than, I made a mistake. I thought they were possessed. I didn't understand. They're not being taken over. They're being rebuilt. He wrote about symbols that predated Christianity, about lights in the sky that pulsed in sacred patterns, about voices that spoke in chords, not words. But buried in the middle of the journal was a page that had been glued shut, sealed in place. Sheriff Redmond pried it open. What they found changed everything. Studio microphone, the 13th chapter. It was a handwritten copy of an apocryphal text, believed lost centuries ago, an ancient scroll once rejected from the official Bible by early church councils. At the top of the page, in Barrett's hand, was scrawled, Greater than, the Book of Ezra, chapter 13. But this wasn't the prophet Ezra. This was something else entirely. The chapter described a covenant between men and beings, not of the earth. It spoke of a well of heaven beneath the soil, sealed in darkness. Of 4 brothers, chosen by lineage, faith, and blood, who would be transformed in fire and light, to awaken what slumbers beneath the dome of black stone. At the bottom of the page was a map. Rough, hand-drawn, but unmistakable. A field with a chapel. A stone circle. A hidden pit. The Blackwood farm. Studio microphone, Unseen forces. Following the journal's discovery, strange weather returned. Lightning storms with no thunder. Dust devils that moved in perfect circles, always counterclockwise. A deafening hum that rolled through town every night at the same time, 3:33 a.m. And then, the eyes started appearing. Scratched into barn doors. Drawn in ash on windowsills. Etched into the dirt by unseen hands. Always the same image. A vertical eye surrounded by 3 concentric rings. Some townsfolk began speaking of it as the Watcher. Others started calling it the Eye of Ezra. But the most terrified just called it what they felt deep down it was. The Mouth. Studio microphone, The Descent of Henry Pike. At this point, a man named Henry Pike re-entered the picture. A local recluse, Pike had once studied theology in St. Louis and worked with underground religious orders known for collecting banned or suppressed texts. He arrived at the church, eyes wild, carrying a book bound in human skin. I've seen this before, he told Sheriff Redmond. The Blackwood farm was built on one of 7 sites across the world, places where the fabric between worlds thins. He pointed to an ancient diagram. The Black Dome, he said, was not a structure. It was a lid, and the Blackwood brothers, they were the key. Studio microphone, September 13th, the night the ground breathed. That night, just before midnight, townspeople reported a low, rhythmic vibration rolling through the earth, a pulse, like a heartbeat. Dogs whined. Horses kicked their stalls. Clocks stopped at 12:06 a.m. And over the Blackwood farm, light erupted from the soil, a blue-white beam that shot straight into the sky and held for 9 full minutes. Those who watched said it made their bones vibrate. Others said they heard music, deep, harmonic, choral. But a few said they heard something else. A voice. A single word whispered through the prairie grass. Greater than, open, Studio microphone, closing narration. Building to Part 6. A missing Bible chapter. A map drawn in the margins of madness. And beneath the Kansas wheat, a black dome begins to crack. In Part 6, we return to the Blackwood farm itself, to the pit, the ritual, and what the brothers have been feeding to the darkness below. And if you thought it was over, you haven't met what's coming next. Subscribe. Tell me in the comments what town you're listening from. And remember, when the ground begins to breathe, run. The Blackwood Brothers, Part 6, The Thing Beneath the Dome. Studio microphone, opening hook, ominous, slow voice. Every town has its secrets. But in Cedar Ridge, the biggest secret was never whispered behind closed doors. It was buried beneath the prairie, waiting to be uncovered. And now, the Blackwood Brothers have opened something older than sin itself. What they've awakened doesn't just want worship. It wants sacrifice. Tonight, we descend beneath the dome. And when we come back up, you may never look at the ground the same way again. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone main story begins. The night sky over Cedar Ridge hadn't been dark in days. A strange pale glow lingered at the horizon like an unending sunset, but it came from no source anyone could find. Farm animals refused to eat. Birds migrated early, and from the direction of the Blackwood property, a sound began to rise. Not a scream, not thunder, a slow, endless inhaling. As if the earth itself had begun to breathe. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, the pit expands. What started as a small stone circle had become a deep pit, 20 feet across, plunging down into blackness. The soil around it had turned gray. Dead. No grass, no roots, no worms. And from the rim, the Blackwood brothers stood in perfect formation. 4 figures in long black coats, staring silently into the void. Neighbors watching from a distance said they never moved. Not once. Just stood there, shoulders back, arms at their sides, lips moving in silent prayer. And then, they began lowering animals into the pit. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, the first sacrifice. It began with a lamb. Pure white, tied with crimson cord, gently lowered into the dark. The moment it crossed the stone lip, the air changed. Cool 1 second, blistering the next. The lamb's bleats echoed strangely, as if bouncing off unseen walls far below. And then, silence. When they pulled the cord back up, it came clean and frayed. As if the rope itself had been bitten through. They tried again with a goat. Then a hog. Then a deer caught near the creek. Each offering disappeared into the black. Each time, the pit responded with a new sound. Deep clicks, rhythmic pulses, once, what sounded like a child laughing underwater. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, back in town. Henry Pike gathered a small group at the church, desperate to stop what he called the feeding. He brought out ancient texts. Diagrams. Scrolls in Latin and Coptic. He explained the pit wasn't a hole. It was a mouth. And the dome they uncovered wasn't natural. It was a lid, placed there by ancient hands to seal something away, a being of light and sound, bound beneath the earth by early civilizations who had no words for what they faced. They only called it one thing. Greater than, the first tongue. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, the journal returns. On September 19th, another envelope appeared on the church steps. Inside, a single page, torn and burned around the edges. It was from Dr. Morrison's journal, now presumed lost. Scrawled in trembling ink. Greater than, they're not brothers anymore. Their blood is not human. I saw the bones beneath the pit, curved spines, too many ribs, jawbones shaped for chanting. Something is feeding. Something is growing. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, transformation continues. Each Blackwood brother now bore physical changes. Ezra's voice had become inhumanly deep, like multiple throats speaking at once. When he talked, people several miles away reported sudden nosebleeds. Caleb's veins pulsed visible equations, glowing briefly as his heart beat. Josiah had stopped blinking. His eyes were now completely silver, reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. And Abel had stopped casting a shadow. During the day, his body produced no darkness. At night, he glowed faintly blue. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, what they fed next. By the 3rd week of September, no more animals were seen around the Blackwood farm. That's when people began to disappear. First, a drifter from Dodge City. Name unknown. Then, Martha Kellogg, the midwife. Then, Elijah Barnes, the man who first reported the ash soil in his field. All 3 were last seen walking toward the Blackwood property at dusk. None returned, but on the 4th morning, something was left behind. In front of the general store, someone had placed 3 shoes, weather-worn, blood-stained, and still warm. Each shoe contained a note. Each note read the same thing. Greater than, it accepted them. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, the dome cracks. On the night of the autumn equinox, the Blackwood pit erupted in light. The dome, black and ancient, cracked down the center, revealing an inner glow like molten gold. The air shimmered with heat. The wheat around the pit wilted instantly. And those who watched from a distance claimed they saw something rise, halfway. Just tall enough to be seen before disappearing again. A ribbed form, slick and wet, with a dozen blinking eyes, and skin that looked like woven fire. They say it stared up at the 4 brothers. And the brothers bowed. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, closing narration, leading to part 7. They opened the ground. They fed the mouth. And now, the thing beneath the dome is no longer sleeping. In part 7, we uncover the true origin of the Blackwood bloodline, and what the brothers were born to awaken. The past wasn't just leading to this moment. It was designed for it. Subscribe, comment your state below, and remember, if you hear the earth breathing beneath your feet, you're already too late. The Blackwood Brothers, Part 7, The Blood Covenant. Studio microphone opening hook, low, grave tone. Every horror has a beginning. And sometimes, the scariest part isn't what's happening now. It's realizing that it was always meant to happen. The Blackwood brothers didn't find something buried beneath their farm. It found them. Tonight, we unseal documents buried for over 200 years. And what they reveal will rewrite everything we know about the Blackwoods. And maybe, about ourselves. Studio microphone main story begins. 2 weeks after the dome cracked, a man named Matthew Dellon arrived in Cedar Ridge. No one knew him, no one invited him, but he showed up with credentials from the Kansas State Historical Society. And a box full of letters, maps, and birth records. He claimed to be researching 19th century homesteading families. But what he found was older than Kansas itself. Studio microphone The Clinton County Connection. Dellon began tracing the Blackwoods lineage, not from Kansas, but back to Ohio, where the brothers had lived before migrating west. There, in the dusty archives of Clinton County, he found sealed court records marked 1793. The name at the top. Greater than Ezra Blackwood I, Revolutionary War veteran. Farmer, church elder, excommunicated. The charges. Greater than, unnatural rites. Unauthorized excavation. Worship of unknown entities. According to witness testimonies, Ezra Blackwood's original Ohio property had contained a stone circle, eerily similar to the one found on the Kansas farm. Locals spoke of chanting at night, symbols carved into tree bark, and livestock found drained of blood but with no wounds. The Ohio Blackwoods were run out of the county under threat of death. But they left behind one strange object, a book. Studio microphone The Book Without a Spine. Stored in a weatherproof iron case and now housed in the Clinton County Archive, the object is neither printed nor handwritten. It's etched into pressed leaves of metal, and bound together with wire made from human hair. Librarians call it the Spine Book, because it has no title, no author, and no language they can identify. But every page contains strange pictograms, shifting spirals, and diagrams of non-Euclidean geometry. Josiah Blackwood had referenced it multiple times in his personal journals. He called it, greater than, the testament of the hollow voice. Studio microphone A family that's not a family. Here's where it gets disturbing. Dellon compared blood records from the Kansas Blackwoods to those from Ohio. What he found wasn't just unusual, it was biologically impossible. The 4 Kansas brothers were listed as siblings. But their blood types didn't match in any known familial way. Even more, genetic markers found in their samples from old medical records matched none of the human populations known today. No European, no Native American, no African lineage. Instead, the notes described their DNA as greater than, repetitive sequences with harmonic alignment. In layman's terms, their blood vibrated, and it sang. Studio microphone The Dream Plague. As Dellon dug deeper into the records, townsfolk began to suffer what they called the Dream Plague. Everyone affected reported the same nightmare. They were buried underground, hands bound, mouths sewn shut. Above them, 4 figures in black coats stood silently, heads bowed, whispering into the dirt. One man woke up screaming, his tongue swollen, eyes bleeding. Another broke every mirror in his home, claiming his reflection had been watching him from the wrong side. Dr. Morrison's name was even whispered in sleep, though he had vanished weeks before. Studio microphone The Hidden Ritual Site. Dellon, with the help of Henry Pike and 2 reluctant farmhands, discovered something behind the Blackwood Chapel. Buried under 6 feet of limestone, they uncovered a second chamber, lined with obsidian stones and carved with unknown glyphs. Inside, bones, arranged in spirals. Dozens of them. Some were animal, some were not, and in the center, an altar etched with the now familiar phrase. Greater than, we make of ourselves a gift. They also found a preserved heart, black and petrified, still connected to thin, gold threads that seemed to pulse faintly when touched. Pike insisted they seal the chamber immediately. Dellon refused. Studio microphone The Letter from Josiah. As if summoned by the discovery, a final letter appeared, left in Pike's study. It was addressed to the seeker. Signed, Josiah Blackwood. The letter was written in a blend of English and another language, the same symbols from the Spine Book. But the English parts read, Greater than, we were not the first, only the most willing. Greater than, our voices are no longer ours. They are tuned to the thing beneath. Greater than, we open not a door, but a throat. Greater than, and what comes through it, will wear our skin as a greeting. Studio microphone closing narration, leading into part 8. They weren't 4 brothers. They were 4 keys, crafted over generations for a purpose no one dared admit. The truth isn't buried under the Blackwood farm. It's been growing, waiting, listening, and in part 8, that silence ends. The mouth beneath the dome is ready to speak. Are you ready to hear it? Subscribe, comment your city below, and remember, when your blood begins to hum at night, you may already belong to it. The Blackwood Brothers, Part 8, When the Ground Began to Speak. Studio microphone opening hook, deep, pulsing tone. What happens when the earth stops holding its secrets? When it doesn't just shake or break open, but starts to speak. We always thought hell was beneath us. But maybe that was just the first whisper. Tonight, we hear what the Blackwoods heard. And we may not come back the same. Studio microphone main story begins. It started with a hum. Low, constant, impossible to trace. At first, it was only at the edge of the Blackwood property. But within 48 hours, everyone in Cedar Ridge could hear it. Men said it vibrated their bones. Women felt it in their teeth. Children cried at night, covering their ears, saying the ground was trying to talk. Studio microphone the blackout. On the night of October 1st, the town went dark. Every oil lamp, every candle, every battery, extinguished or drained. Even the moon vanished behind unnatural clouds, so black it looked painted on the sky. And then, across the prairie, came the sound. A voice, not human. 1,000 overlapping syllables, echoing in harmonic patterns that rattled windows, cracked stone, and made milk spoil in sealed jars. Some fell to their knees. Some clawed at their own ears. Henry Pike wrote in his final journal entry. Greater than, it doesn't speak with words. It sings in numbers. And now, I understand none of us have ever truly been alone. Studio microphone the return of Dr. Morrison. That same night, drive. Samuel Morrison returned. He had been missing for nearly a month. But he walked into Cedar Ridge barefoot, covered in dried mud and ash, his hands shaking and his eyes blank. He said nothing for nearly 2 hours. Then, as he stood in front of the Methodist church, he finally whispered. Greater than, they called it the mouth of days. And it's been open before. Studio microphone the mouth of days. According to Morrison, what lay beneath the Blackwood farm wasn't just an entity. It was a threshold, a convergence point where sound, flesh, and memory could be exchanged. He described visions, cities made of bone, creatures built from light and repetition, entire timelines stacked like books. And at the center of it all, the mouth. Not a god, not a devil, but a mechanism, older than Earth. Capable of granting knowledge, at a cost. Greater than, it doesn't devour flesh, he said. It devours identity. Studio microphone the 7 who went missing. In the days that followed, 7 townsfolk vanished without explanation. 1. Reverend Markley. 2. The teacher, Miss Annette Crow. 3. Old Jacob Haynes. 4. A boy named Eli. 5. 2 cattlemen from the outlying ranches. 6. And Henry Pike himself. None left notes. No signs of struggle, but each of their homes contained the same strange symbol, a spiral etched into wood, stone, or flesh. Some were burned into floorboards. Others appeared inside mirrors. One was carved into a living tree, bleeding sap that smelled like metal. Studio microphone the transformation spreads. Witnesses described Ezra Blackwood floating inches above the ground, arms outstretched, eyes black as coal. Caleb stood beneath the dome and recited prime numbers for 3 hours without stopping, in a voice that echoed twice, once forward, once backward. Josiah now communicated only through writing, his hands covered in script that pulsed when read aloud. And Abel had stopped moving altogether. He simply stood at the edge of the pit, staring downward. But his mouth opened wider every day, until by October 6 it had split from chin to chest. And the sound of wind came from within it. Studio microphone the dome breaks. On October 7, the dome shattered. Not exploded, not collapsed. It broke cleanly into 9 equal pieces, which fell inward like petals. At the center, a hole, now glowing with pale, throbbing light, like a heartbeat under skin. Those who dared look into it described visions. Their dead relatives, places they'd never visited, symbols they didn't understand, but instantly believed. And a voice, always a voice, saying, greater than, join the pattern. Serve the breath, dash dash dash. Studio microphone, the New Testament. That same week, Dellen returned with another page from Josiah's private writings. It was titled, Greater Than the Covenant of Recurrence. It spoke of a cycle that happens every 147 years. A place must be chosen. A bloodline must be refined. 4 vessels must be prepared. And the mouth must be fed not just with bodies, but with belief. Greater than, it does not eat flesh alone, Josiah wrote. It consumes certainty, doubt, conviction, hope, that is how it grows. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, the thing beneath moves. On October 10th, at 3:47 a.m., the earth trembled. Not like an earthquake, like something was shifting underneath, rearranging itself. Cattle screamed across the region. Frogs emerged from dry wells. Birds dropped from the sky. And every clock in Cedar Ridge stopped, permanently, at 3:47 a.m. That's when people began to report seeing themselves. Walking down roads. Watching from fields. Greater than, not ghosts, one man said. Just, wrong versions of me. Like a mirror I forgot I broke. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone closing narration, leading into part 9. They opened the mouth. They heard its name. And now, it's teaching us how to become like it. In part 9, the brothers leave the farm. The Dome was just their beginning. The rest of Kansas is next. If you can still hear your thoughts, you're one of the lucky ones. Subscribe, comment below where you're listening from. And remember, if you wake up and see yourself standing at the foot of your bed, don't blink, because it's not you anymore. The Blackwood Brothers, Part 9, the ones who leave no footprints. Studio microphone opening hook, ominous whisper tone. You thought it would stay on the farm. That the horror was bound by fences, kept quiet by distance, isolated by time. But monsters don't follow boundaries. They follow intention. And tonight, we witness what happens when the Blackwoods finally step beyond their land. And leave no footprints behind. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone main story begins. The first to see them was Sheriff Elijah Rourke. It was the evening of October 11th, just after sunset. He had ridden out to the Blackwood farm with a 6-man posse. Their goal, secure the site, search for the missing townsfolk, bring order to the madness. But they never made it. Only Rourke came back. And he came back without his eyes. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, the sheriff's return. He staggered into town at dawn, clothing ripped, boots missing, arms cut with symbols no one could decipher. When asked what had happened, he simply whispered, greater than, they walked past us, but they didn't move. He spoke of time folding in on itself. He said the sun blinked. He said the men he rode with were turned inside out, not physically, but spiritually. Greater than, they saw themselves dying, he said. Over and over again. Greater than, the brothers were light and sound and silence. They were mercy and punishment. Rourke never spoke again. He died 3 days later in his sleep. But his body never cooled. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, the sightings across Kansas. Over the next 48 hours, reports flooded in from neighboring counties. 4 tall men walking down an empty road at 2 a.m., vanishing when headlights approached. An entire congregation at a rural Baptist church claiming to see 4 men weeping blood in the trees. A train conductor swearing he saw 4 identical men standing on the tracks, a full mile apart, simultaneously. All described the same figures. Black coats, pale eyes, harmonic voices, no footprints, no shadows, only silence where sound should have been. And sound where silence once lived. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, the first collapse. On October 13th, the town of Iron Hollow, 20 miles east of Cedar Ridge, vanished. It wasn't destroyed. It was simply not there anymore. Fields remained. Roads continued. But where the town had once been, there was now only a perfect circle of scorched earth, 300 feet wide. In the center, a wooden cross, scorched black, carved with the word greater than, accepted. There were no remains. Only echoes, audible only when standing still, just before sunset. People claim the wind says names. Not just the names of the missing. But your name, if you listen long enough. Dash dash dash. Studio microphone, the voice in the sky. On the evening of October 14th, an unexplained aurora appeared in the skies over Kansas. But this was no natural phenomenon. It formed not random colors, but shapes, mathematical glyphs, rotating patterns that resembled diagrams found in Josiah Blackwood's journal. Worse, every animal in the region went silent. Birds stopped singing, coyotes stopped howling, even insects froze mid-movement. And then, for 18 seconds, the sky spoke. Everyone heard it, even the deaf. Greater than, breath is borrowed. Time is leased. Flesh is optional. Come home. Then the aurora vanished. But afterward, those who had heard the message reported strange effects. Teeth grew brittle. Mirrors cracked spontaneously. Some claimed their reflections moved before they did. Studio microphone, Henry Pike's final recording. Before his disappearance, Pike had installed a phonograph in the Blackwood chapel, set to record continuously. Only one recording survived. Timestamp: October 15, 2:04 a.m. It begins with wind, then footsteps, 4 pairs, walking slowly on wood, then, a voice. Greater than, we are not ascending. We are becoming. Greater than, time is only a door if you learn how to bleed through it. Greater than, we were never men. We were invitations. The rest of the recording is static. Except for one final sound. A knock. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then silence. Studio microphone, what the children drew. In the following days, schoolteachers across Kansas reported strange behavior from children aged 6 to 11. They stopped playing. They stopped speaking. And they all began drawing the same image. A dome. 4 figures inside. A spiral in the sky. Some even carved it into their desks, without tools. One girl, Annie Louise Brewer, didn't speak for 4 days. Then she looked at her teacher and calmly said, "Greater than, the brothers are just the beginning. We are next. Studio microphone, the town votes to forget." By October 20th, panic had turned to paralysis. Cedar Ridge's remaining residents held a meeting in the ruins of the Methodist Church. There were no minutes, no discussion, just a decision. Greater than, seal the records. Burn the journals. Remove the name, Blackwood, from every map. The Kansas State Medical Board followed suit, quietly. Files were buried, maps were redrawn, and Cedar Ridge was officially listed as uninhabited. But of course, people still live there. They just don't remember that they do. Studio microphone, closing narration, leading into part 10. This wasn't a haunting, it was a signal, and the Blackwood brothers were the broadcast. In part 10, we reach the end of the timeline. And the beginning of something far worse. Something that can't be stopped. Only recognized. So ask yourself, have you heard the hum? Is your shadow still moving like it should? If not, you've already joined the pattern. Subscribe, comment below if you still remember your name. And prepare, because next time, the mouth opens again. The Blackwood brothers, part 10, the pattern will hold. Studio microphone, opening hook, slow, reverberating tone. You've stayed with this story through every whisper, every shadow, every impossible truth. But this was never just about 4 brothers. It was about a doorway. And about you, listening now. Because tonight, the pattern completes. And the mouth opens again. Studio microphone, main story begins. By the time November 1, 1878 arrived, Cedar Ridge no longer existed in any way maps could record. Oh, there were still buildings. Still farms. Still trees and animals and fences. But no one inside remembered their names. Some wandered, barefoot, eyes glazed. Others stood silently in doorways, humming tuneless notes under their breath. The Blackwood farm itself was no longer visible from the road. Not because it had been hidden, but because your mind simply refused to look in that direction. Studio microphone, the last witness. The only surviving first-hand account came from a woman named Margaret Adler, a schoolteacher from Newton, Kansas. She had traveled west looking for her missing cousin. When she reached Cedar Ridge, she found an entire town behaving like a dream half remembered. She saw children walking backward in perfect sync. She saw livestock standing still, completely still, for hours. And she saw the 4 Blackwood brothers standing in a circle in the middle of the wheat field. Chanting in reverse. Their mouths moved normally, but the sound flowed backward, upward, like water returning to a storm. Studio microphone, the revelation. On her second night in Cedar Ridge, Margaret claimed she was invited. Not by words, but by a sudden silence. Everything stopped, the wind, the insects, the strange music. And then she heard it. Greater than, come see. Come understand. Come become. She followed the voice to the Blackwood chapel. What she found was not a building anymore. It was a shape. 9 sides. 9 openings. No door. Inside, the walls pulsed like lungs. And the altar floated 3 feet above the floor, inscribed with symbols that rearranged themselves as she watched. At the center, suspended in light, a heart, not human, still beating. Studio microphone, the real purpose of the brothers. She learned, somehow, without being told. The Blackwoods had not been chosen. They had been built. 4 archetypes. Ezra, the mind. Caleb, the math. Josiah, the word. Abel, the faith. Together, they formed a signal tower, tuned through pain, sacrifice, and belief. They were never meant to survive. Only to transmit. To send out a frequency that would awaken others. Studio microphone, the pattern repeats. Margaret fled the chapel. She made it back to Newton 3 days later, barefoot and mute. She never spoke again, but on the last night of her life, a nurse found her sitting upright in her bed. Smiling. The nurse asked why. Margaret whispered, "Greater than, it's begun again. In West Virginia this time." Then she died. Clocks in the hospital stopped for 13 seconds. And outside, the wind hummed. Studio microphone, the sealed documents. In 1926, a hidden cache of state records was discovered in Topeka. Inside, classified documents from 1878, marked Blackwood, eyes only. They included Dr. Morrison's original journal pages fused together with unknown resin, a map with Cedar Ridge missing entirely, a transcript labeled, "Observed harmonic phenomena," a hand-drawn sketch of the chapel with the words, "Greater than, do not approach," mimics sacred geometry, induces collapse. Most chilling, a final document from the Kansas State Board of Mental Health. It read, "Greater than, there is no cure for those who listen too long. Remove tongues. Remove mirrors. Remove memory. Greater than, the pattern will hold." Studio microphone, what's happening now? You may think this story is just history. That it ended 147 years ago. But then, explain the spiral crop circles found in Idaho in 2023. Explain the 4 identical men spotted outside an elementary school in Ohio last month. Explain the whispers you've heard behind you, when no one was there. The pattern isn't a place. It's a frequency. And the Blackwoods, they were just the first broadcast. Studio microphone, final warning. Before you go to sleep tonight, ask yourself. Do your reflections move when you do? Has the hum begun to sound like a name? Have you ever woken up standing, and not known how you got there? If the answer is yes to any of those, you've already been marked. You are part of the pattern now. You cannot be unchosen. But maybe, you were never truly you to begin with. Studio microphone, final narration. This was the story of the Blackwood brothers. Or at least, the parts we were allowed to remember. If you've made it this far, tell us where you're listening from. Because if the pattern is waking again, we'll need witnesses. We'll need survivors. We'll need you. Subscribe. Remember your name. And whatever you do, don't answer the knock. The end.